Hi everybody. This is the fourth video in this short video series on mood disorders. And in this video, we're going to talk about manic episodes. Now, what I don't want you to do is see depression on one side and mania on the other, and that the two are completely opposite. They're going to seem very opposite. One is high, one is low, but we have to remember that irritability can go through both, and that they can both be very uncomfortable, and they can be mixed. We'll talk a little bit about that later. A manic episode is a period where the person's mood is elevated, expansive, they're big, they take up the whole room, or irritable. And they're feeling very energetic, and they have a lot of activity. So, if you know what somebody is like when they are on a psychostimulant like Ritalin or speed, sometimes this is a little similar. The person, and you'll see from the symptoms, the person might be in a very good mood. Is likely to be irritable, talking a lot, talking fast, very active, not sleeping, easily distractible. So you can see how that might be similar. That's just to give you a little bit of an idea. So what the DSM is telling us, once again, we have what it looks like and how long it lasts before we can give a diagnosis. And for a diagnosis of a manic episode, we need 3 or more of these 7 diagnostic criteria. If the person's mood isn't really elevated, but just irritable, then the DSM asks us to find 4 signs or symptoms. So we begin with inflated self-esteem or grandiosity. So this person is feeling very confident about themselves and their abilities, their likability, their worth in the world. They have a decreased need for sleep, and this is a problem because somebody can feel rested after not sleeping at all. So sometimes people might not sleep for a week, and even though they feel rested, it doesn't mean that the lack of sleep isn't affecting them. And after a while, not sleeping makes your symptoms worse. So one can start becoming psychotic, having hallucinations or delusions, partly because of lack of sleep. The person is more talkative and has pressure to keep on talking. And this is, sometimes it feels like the person is speaking so fast that it's like when so I have some second languages that are not my primary language, and I have to listen hard, and sometimes I only understand, like I'm only catching up on the next sentence. That's sometimes what it feels like when the person speaks so fast that I'm like a sentence behind. And it's very hard to interrupt. It's hard to get in a word edgewise. Flight of ideas, or subjective feeling that thoughts are racing. So flight of ideas is when the person kind of takes off. So they start talking about something, and then so they're talking about the weather, and then clouds, and then this picture that they saw where God was sitting on a cloud, and God is everywhere, and we're, so just really tangential, and ideas being expansive and taking off. Sometimes people will report that they feel like their thoughts are racing, but you can't necessarily see it. And people are very distractible. Their attention is constantly drawn to external stimuli that are not relevant. So very hard to focus on what's going on right now. And they might just report that, or you can actually see it. Increase in goal-directed activity, at work, school, social, sexual. So this is interesting. I'll tell you a story about a client that I had. you'd think this is great, to have focus and, increase your goal-directed activity. I would love to have that. I would love to be able to, work for 10 or 15 hours straight and be focused. It doesn't quite work like that, though. So I was seeing a man who came in for relationship problems. He was having trouble in his marriage, and he had questions about what he wanted to do with the rest of his life. And he was an architect. And he was quite well known. So, he was doing well in his life, and he was also, he was doing well in business. And I saw him the first session. He denied any history of depression, and we started talking about his relationship and his past. And maybe 1 or 2 sessions later, he came in, and he was kind of excited. He said that he was really focusing on his work and had a new energy and a new refreshing excitement about work that he had been doing for a long time. And the following session, he was looking a little disheveled. He hadn't shaved. And he said that he thought he was onto something brilliant. And he explained to me that architects have a foe, and their foe is really gravity, which made sense to me. I mean, you need to make things stand strong and not fall down. That makes perfect sense to me. And he started explaining some things, and that then I wasn't understanding very well. He was speaking really fast. I tried to slow him down. I tried to interrupt and ask questions so that I could understand better. And I couldn't interrupt. And when I tried, he kind of snapped at me. He was very irritable. And he said that he was working on a discovery that he thought was really going to be able to challenge gravity. That he thought that he was working on this new architectural design that would kind of beat gravity. Maybe he's very creative and very smart. Maybe he's onto something new. And, I've been in the creative process where you don't care about how you look and you're really just into it. I didn't think much of it. I was starting to pay attention. I couldn't contact anybody in his life and ask questions because of confidentiality. Well, the next session he came in, and clearly he had not been sleeping. He was talking really fast. It was very hard for me to follow what he was talking about with gravity and architecture. And I asked him for permission to speak with his wife, and he said no. He wasn't at a place where hospitalization would have been appropriate. But I was starting to get concerned, and sure enough, within a few days, his wife called me, and she had to have him hospitalized because his behavior had become dangerous to himself. He had beliefs in his abilities that he was, basically that he couldn't die, and therefore was being very risky. He was taking a lot of risks, and he wound up being hospitalized for a while. That's an example of goal-directed activity that is not useful and eventually becomes dissociated from reality and is more of a sign of a problem than of really strong creative and intelligent functioning. Excessive involvement in activities that have a high potential for painful consequences. So what you see here is sometimes what this looks like is spending a lot of money, and sometimes money that is not even yours. So you might wind up spending all of your money, and then spending all of your partner's money, and then spending all of your retirement and all of your savings. Being sexually active when it's inappropriate, or being sexually unsafe, or being sexually abusive. I'm not saying that people who are in a manic episode are necessarily sexually violent or abusive, but It's hard to hear no when you think that you're so amazing, and when you're so confident in yourself and you don't listen to others, you might not hear another person say no. People get into foolish investments. I went on a call once to a woman's house, and she was in a manic episode, and she had purchased all of this audio equipment. She wasn't a musician, she wasn't a speaker. Boxes and boxes and boxes of, and some of it repeated the exact same thing, of audio equipment that she'd gotten online. So all of her money went to that. That's an example of really unrestrained buying sprees that are not that are damaging. Now, one of the problems with manic episodes is that they feel good. Often people feel really good, and their behavior damages their own life. You know, they wind up, often after treatment, when the person is stabilized, there's a lot of guilt, regret, and remorse about the behavior from when they were in a manic episode. Sometimes they don't remember it all, but when they're told, they're just horrified at their own behavior. And that's really sad. And you could see why a person would stop taking their medication or not want to start when they start feeling really good. I mean, who wants to stop feeling really good? Especially when the medication can make you feel dull, has side effects. So sometimes what we see is that a person has to go through a few of these episodes before they know in advance that they're going to regret this. And I wanted to say it's almost like an addiction, only you have to take your medication or, you know, participate in your treatment so that you don't wind up, you know, ruining things that you've worked hard for. So that is a description of a manic episode. And the DSM tells us that 1 week of that is sufficient for diagnosis, unless the person had to be hospitalized for it, and then we just can give the diagnosis. A manic episode, typically a full-blown manic episode, is much easier to detect than, say, a depressive episode. So I'm going to stop here